Proceed with the next extraction, barked High Scientist Calax, his crystalline fingers dancing over a console that pulsed with eerie rhythmic light. The room buzzed with efficiency as his team worked like a machine, a perfect organism engineered for precision. The chamber they occupied, a vault of translucent walls that shimmered like molten glass, vibrated subtly as if alive. Around them, towering arrays of alien glyphs and holographic screens projected Earth, its continents spinning serenely, its oceans reflecting sunlight like polished silver. The air within the lab carried a sterile chill, amplified by the faint, sharp tang of processed minerals. Despite the cold, sweat formed on the ridges of Calax's brow, an involuntary reaction that belied his species' reputation for unshakable calm. The operation unfolding before him was monumental, centuries of silent observation crystallized into action. "Another familial structure analyzed," announced an assistant, his voice as clipped as his mannerisms. "Data extraction complete. Subject 918. Designation: Human Adolescent. Emotional bonding patterns uploaded." Calax tilted his head, his fractal eyes narrowing with what could almost be described as fascination. "Patterns," he prompted. "Distinct emotional thresholds, intense familial attachment paired with protective instincts. Their dependency on young progeny is profound." Calax allowed himself a grim smirk. "Perfect. Amplify the projection. Let the council see what I see." He tapped a sequence into the console, and the hologram shifted. A family scene unfurled, a child playing under a tree, laughing as his father swung him into the air. The hologram looped, joy encapsulated in a moment too fleeting to grasp. "Look at them," Calax murmured, the faint crackle of his exhalation breaking the silence. "Fragile as spun glass, yet they harbor the arrogance to reach beyond their world. These creatures, these humans, must learn their place." An underling hesitated, his mandibles quivering slightly before he spoke. "High Scientist, is their destruction necessary? They are only beginning to ascend. Perhaps—" "Enough!" Calax's words struck like a whip, cutting through the sterile air. He turned slowly, his presence looming, the crystalline facets of his body refracting the light into jagged, predatory streaks. "Do not mistake empathy for strength. Their ascent threatens our dominion. They craft chaos from ingenuity, disrupting natural order wherever they extend their reach. They do not learn. They conquer." He leaned forward, his shadow splitting across the assistant's form. "And so, we will teach them to kneel." The assistant shrank back, his reluctance melting under Calax's glare. Around the room, other scientists exchanged fleeting glances but remained silent. "Continue the simulation," Calax commanded, his tone edged with finality. "Earth's vulnerabilities are the key to their collapse. Show me their nexus of emotional fragility." Another hologram sprang to life. This one depicted a schoolyard, children laughing, playing, their uninhibited joy creating a cacophony of life. The scientists watched in silence, their alien minds processing each detail. "Fascinating," murmured another assistant. "They cluster the vulnerable together, centralized, unprotected, a critical flaw in their design." Calax's smile returned, sharper now. "A flaw we will exploit. Begin modeling for a coordinated assault. I want precision, not one child spared." Beneath the floor, the faint vibrations of the lab deepened as the alien facility's systems reconfigured to process the next phase. The chamber hummed like a predator's breath, growing heavier with anticipation. "Deploy probes to monitor their zero-point energy experiment," Calax continued, gesturing toward the projection of Earth's experiment in orbit. "They dabble in forces they cannot comprehend. We will let their curiosity open the door for us." The projection shifted again, showing Earth's bustling laboratories. Human scientists gestured animatedly, their expressions brimming with discovery. In the background, panels of light illuminated rows of calculations, brilliant but careless in their ambition. "High Scientist," one assistant ventured, "their experiments suggest proximity to unlocking space-time manipulation. A controlled breach could provide us—" "The opening we need," Calax finished, his jagged smile returning. "Yes, Prepare the fleets for silent deployment. We will wait. Let them build their door. We shall enter uninvited." In the corner of the room, another scientist shifted uncomfortably. His crystalline arms hovered over a console as his gaze flickered between the projected humans and his colleagues. His voice trembled slightly as he spoke. "Do you not admire them, High Scientist? Their resolve? Their unity?" Kallax turned slowly, his many-layered gaze piercing through the question. "Admire them?" he repeated, his tone like a knife dragged across glass. "Number, I acknowledge them, as one acknowledges a storm before it breaks. Beautiful in its chaos, yes, but it exists only to destroy what stands before it." He stepped closer to the trembling scientist, each step reverberating through the room. "And just like a storm, they must be harnessed or eradicated." The chamber fell silent as Kallax turned back to the holograms. His voice softened, but the menace remained. "Mark this moment. We stand on the precipice of history. The humans believe they have risen beyond their fragility. We will remind them that the stars belong to us." The assistant bowed his head, retreating into the collective anonymity of the team. Around the chamber, the other scientists resumed their tasks, their movements precise, their focus unbroken. Kallax moved to the central console, staring at the projected Earth. His reflective skin shimmered faintly in the light, casting fractured rainbows onto the floor, a sharp contrast to the cold purpose radiating from him. "Activate the infiltrators," he commanded, his tone unwavering. "Let them walk unseen among the humans, learn their strengths, catalog their weaknesses. The time of observation ends. The time of annihilation begins." The projection of Earth lingered in the center of the room, spinning slowly, oblivious to the predator circling in its shadow. Kallax's voice, low and deliberate, broke the silence one final time. "Prepare the galaxy's epitaph for humanity. They dared to dream, and we silenced them." Earth spun quietly in the vast silence of the cosmos, its oceans gleaming under the watchful gaze of the sun. From orbit, it seemed untouched by the shadow looming in the distance. Far below, cities pulsed with life, a testament to the restless energy of humanity. Laughter echoed from parks and playgrounds, carried on the crisp breeze that swept through streets lined with towering glass and steel. Children's voices rose and fell in melodic chaos, the unbridled joy of innocence thriving in a world of progress. At the forefront of that progress stood the Vanguard Institute of Quantum Research, a monolithic structure of glinting metal and translucent panels. It towered above the city like a sentinel, its spires reaching for the heavens. Inside, the air buzzed with anticipation, a charge of excitement that left skin tingling and hearts racing. "Let's run it again," said Dr. Nolan Greaves, his voice steady, but edged with barely contained exhilaration. He leaned over the console, his sharp green eyes flicking between lines of cascading data. His hands, calloused from years of fine-tuning machinery, hovered just above the control panel, waiting for the moment to strike. "Everything's aligned. We're on the cusp." "On the cusp of glory or disaster," quipped Isaac Porter, a junior physicist whose role oscillated between sarcasm and genius. He tossed a stylus onto the desk, its clatter echoing in the room filled with soft hums and whirring monitors. "Because I'm not sure this thing knows the difference." Greaves shot him a look, but there was no malice in it. "You're here because you know the difference, Porter. Now focus." Around them the lab thrummed with life. Technicians in white coats darted between towering arrays of superconductors, their footsteps punctuating the constant drone of conversation. Holographic screens floated in midair, casting an otherworldly glow that bathed the room in shades of blue and silver. Each screen displayed a fragment of the experiment, streams of data, intricate diagrams of space-time distortions, and the pulsing core of the zero-point energy generator. In the center of the lab stood the generator itself, a hulking sphere of tempered alloy encased in an intricate lattice of wires and conduits. It seemed to breathe, its surface rippling with faint undulating waves. Inside, something glimmered, a contained storm of light, flickering like trapped lightning. "Stabilizers holding," announced Jalik, a quiet but meticulous technician seated at a monitoring station. His voice barely rose above the ambient noise, but it carried the weight of reassurance. "Energy output at 47%. Greaves nodded, his fingers dancing over the console as he calibrated the next sequence. "Increase output incrementally. Let's see how the field responds." Porter, standing just behind him, crossed his arms. "Incrementally, huh? Like throwing pebbles into a lake and hoping you don't make waves?" Greaves didn't answer, his focus unyielding. The field surrounding the generator began to shimmer, waves of distortion bending the light around it. The room seemed to grow heavier, the air pressing against skin like an unseen force. A faint vibration trembled through the floor, unsettling but not yet alarming. "Output at 60%, Chilik reported, his voice steady despite the growing tension in the room. "Field integrity, holding." Greaves leaned closer, his breath fogging the edge of the console as the data shifted. His heart thudded in his chest, each beat a hammer blow. This was it. Decades of theory, years of experimentation. Every ounce of sweat, every sleepless night converged in this moment. They were rewriting the laws of the universe, touching the threads of reality itself. And yet, a nagging unease lingered at the edges of his mind. It was the same feeling that had plagued him for weeks. A shadow of doubt, impossible to ignore but equally impossible to define. It sat heavy in his gut, like the calm before a storm. 70%, Chalik called out. "The field is fluctuating, but stabilizers are compensating." Porter shifted uneasily, his gaze fixed on the generator. The shimmering light inside had grown brighter, its flickers more erratic. He opened his mouth to speak, but Greaves cut him off. "Just a little further," he said, his voice low but resolute. "We're almost there." The generator pulsed, a single, deliberate heartbeat that sent a ripple of energy coursing through the lab. The vibrations grew stronger, rattling equipment and sending pens rolling off desks. Technicians exchanged uneasy glances, their movements slowing as tension thickened the air. 80%, Chilik reported, his voice tight now. "Field integrity dropping. Stabilizers. Compensating. But barely." "Pull it back," Porter urged, his tone sharpening. "Greaves, pull it back now." But Greaves didn't move. His hands were frozen over the console, his eyes locked on the swirling storm within the generator. It was beautiful, mesmerizing, a glimpse into the very fabric of existence. He couldn't look away, even as the room trembled and the light from the generator began to bleed outwards, casting jagged shadows across the walls. 85%, Chalik said, louder this time. "We're losing control." The generator erupted with a soundless burst of light, brighter than anything Greaves had ever seen. It wasn't just light, it was everything. A kaleidoscope of color and motion, an entire spectrum unfolding in a single instant. The lab was bathed in its radiance, and for a moment all else faded. Then came the sound, a deep guttural crack that seemed to split the air itself, reverberating through the very marrow of their bones. The light twisted, folding in on itself, and then expanded outward in a surge of energy that knocked technicians off their feet and sent consoles sparking wildly. "Shut it down!" Greaves shouted, his voice hoarse as he scrambled to regain control. His fingers flew across the console, but the data was incomprehensible now, a torrent of numbers and symbols that defied logic. Porter grabbed his arm, pulling him back. "It's too late! Get out of there!" The generator pulsed again, the light within it collapsing inward like a dying star. The room quaked violently, and then, with a deafening roar, a rift tore open above the generator. It was a wound in space itself, a swirling void that defied description. It sucked in the light, the sound, the air, leaving behind an unbearable silence. And then it was gone. The lab was still. Smoke and debris filled the air, mingling with the acrid tang of burnt circuits. Technicians coughed and groaned, picking themselves up from the floor. Kellick slumped over his console, his hands trembling as he stared at the readings. "Tell me we didn't just destroy the universe," Porter muttered, his voice shaking. Greaves didn't answer. He couldn't. His eyes were fixed on the void where the generator had been. The rift was gone, but the space it had occupied felt wrong. like the echo of a scream that hadn't yet faded. "We've done something," he said finally, his voice hollow. "Something we can't undo." Far beyond Earth, in the cold expanse of space, the Zeroth's fleets began to stir. Porter's breath came in ragged gasps as he stood amidst the devastation of the lab. The generator was gone, its intricate lattice reduced to a smoldering crater. Smoke curled upward in spirals, carrying the bitter stench of scorched metal and seared insulation. Overhead, the faint flicker of emergency lights fought to penetrate the haze, casting long shadows that danced across shattered monitors and splintered glass. "What have we done?" Chalik muttered, his voice barely audible. His hands trembled as he stared at the console where the readings defied comprehension. Numbers rolled in endless streams, symbols blinking with erratic urgency. The laws of physics, their unraveling. Greaves crouched beside what remained of the generator's base, his fingers brushing the blackened edges. The air here felt heavier, as if the act of breathing demanded permission. It carried an odd resonance, a sensation that seemed to vibrate deep within the bones. The fabric of reality itself felt thin, tenuous. "It's not just a breach," Greaves said, his voice low but steady. This is a wound, a tear in space-time. More than that." Porter's words were clipped as he gestured to the holographic projection that had sputtered to life above a nearby console. A dark void swirled in its center, ringed by fluctuating distortions. Whatever we ripped open, it wasn't empty. A cold silence settled over the room, broken only by the distant hiss of extinguishers combating small fires. The surviving team members exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier camaraderie fractured by the enormity of their error. "We need containment protocols now," Greaves barked, forcing his voice to carry over the tension. "Shut down every auxiliary system connected to the core. Seal this lab. And for God's sake, get comms back online." Chalik hesitated. "What about the rift? If it collapses—" "It's not collapsing," Porter interrupted, his tone harsh. "Look at the readings. It's expanding. Slowly, but it's growing." The revelation hung in the air, suffocating. No one spoke. No one dared. "Sir," a junior technician called out, his face pale as he stared at another monitor. "There's something moving near the rift. Something not from here." Greaves pushed past him, his eyes narrowing at the display. The image was grainy, distorted, but unmistakable. Sleek, angular shapes emerging from the void, their forms glinting with an unnatural light. Alien crafts, their surfaces smooth as obsidian, glided soundlessly through the void above Jupiter. "They're already here," Greaves whispered, his voice almost reverent. He straightened, his gaze hardening as he turned to the team. "We've opened a door for them. We need to close it before they step through." The urgency in his voice jolted the room into action. Technicians scrambled to regain control of failing systems, their fingers flying over consoles as data streams stuttered and blurred. Porter joined Greaves at the projection, his jaw tight as he observed the alien vessels moving in perfect, predatory formation. "Do you think they've been waiting for this?" Porter asked, his voice low. Greaves nodded grimly. "They were watching. All they needed was a key, and we handed it to them." Far above, beyond the grasp of Earth's atmosphere, the alien ships began to spread out, deploying shimmering orbs that drifted through the void like malevolent fireflies. The orbs pulsed faintly, their surfaces rippling with strange patterns that seemed alive. Greaves recognized them immediately from the earlier Zeroth data they'd intercepted, probes designed to map, analyze, and disable. "They're probing us," he said, his voice tight. "If those things reach Earth, they'll know everything. Weak points, defenses, infrastructure, everything." Chalik looked up from his console, his face pale. "How do we stop them? We don't have anything that can—" "We're not stopping them from here," Greaves snapped. "We need to get this information to Central Command. They'll have to activate orbital defenses. Seelig, reroute power to comms now." Porter frowned, his gaze lingering on the projection. "And if Command doesn't act fast enough?" Greaves didn't answer. He didn't have to. The unspoken truth was written across his face. The lab's emergency comm system crackled weakly as it sputtered to life. "This is Vanguard Institute," Greaves said, his voice steady despite the rising dread. "Priority 1. We have a confirmed breach near Jupiter's orbit. Multiple unidentified vessels have entered through the rift. Immediate response required." The reply came moments later, curt and efficient. "Acknowledged, Vanguard. Deploying observation drones to verify. Stand by." "Verify?" Porter scoffed, his frustration boiling over. "What more do they need to see? A landing party?" "Porter, enough," Greaves snapped. "They'll move when they have to. Right now, we need to hold the line." The projection flickered again, showing the probes accelerating toward Earth's atmosphere. Their faint trails burned like comet tails, a stark reminder of the imminent threat. "Shellick, any way to disrupt those things?" Greaves asked. "Not from here," Shellick admitted, his voice heavy with frustration. "We don't have the range or the firepower." Greaves clenched his fists, his mind racing. For all their brilliance, for all their ambition, they were scientists, not soldiers. Their tools were built to uncover mysteries, not fight wars. Yet here they stood, staring down an enemy they had unknowingly invited. Porter broke the silence, his tone suddenly sharp. "There's another way." The stabilizers. Greaves turned to him, his brow furrowing. "What about them?" "They're still connected to the power grid. If we overload them, it might generate an EMP strong enough to disable the probes before they reach Earth. It could also destabilize the entire facility," Chalik pointed out. "And there's no guarantee it'll work." "It's better than doing nothing," Porter shot back. He looked at Greaves, his expression hard. "You know I'm right." Greaves hesitated, the weight of the decision pressing down on him like a physical force. He glanced around the room at the faces of his team, faces etched with fear and determination. They were waiting for him to lead. "Do it," he said finally. "Divert all remaining power to the stabilizers. We don't get a second chance." The team moved as one, their earlier hesitation replaced with a grim resolve. The air grew thick with the scent of overheating circuits as energy surged through the lab's failing systems. Consoles sparked and flickered, their displays struggling to keep up with the strain. "Stabilizers at max capacity," Shellick reported, his voice tight. "Discharge ready on your command." Greaves stared at the projection one last time, at the alien probes hurtling toward Earth. His hand hovered over the console, his heart pounding in his chest. "Now," he said, slamming his palm down. The stabilizers roared to life, their energy output reaching a fever pitch. A blinding surge of light filled the lab, followed by a deep, resonant crack that seemed to shake the very walls. For a moment, everything was silent. Then the projection flickered back to life. The probes were gone, their energy signatures erased. But the rift remained. Greaves exhaled slowly, his relief tempered by the knowledge of what still lay ahead. "They're not done," Porter said quietly, "and neither are we." Far beyond Earth, the Zeroth ships shifted formation, their movements deliberate and ominous. They had been tested, and they would respond. Greaves stared at the projection, its cold, glowing light illuminating the tight lines on his face. The probes were gone, but the rift still churned with unnatural energy, a vortex of chaos that defied understanding. Beyond it, the alien fleet loomed, a silent storm gathering at the edge of human comprehension. "They're moving," Porter said, his voice sharp as a blade. He gestured at the screen where the Zeroth ships began to shift, their formations tightening with predatory precision. "Whatever that EMP did, it just made us louder." Greaves clenched his jaw. "They were always going to come. We just sped up their timetable." Chalik's hands trembled over his console, his usual composure cracking. "We've bought Earth a few minutes, maybe hours, but those ships, there's no way our defenses can—" "Enough," Greaves cut him off, his tone steely. "Get this data to Central Command. If they're not already mobilizing, they need to be." The lab fell into a tense rhythm as the team worked to relay their findings, the faint crackle of transmissions punctuating the controlled chaos. But outside, beyond their walls of steel and glass, the skies were already shifting. Above Earth, the Zeroth vessels breached the rift with eerie grace. Their ships moved like living creatures, sleek and glinting, their surfaces rippling with strange patterns. They made no sound, their presence marked only by the faint distortion in the atmosphere as they sliced through it, like blades through silk. The first attack came without warning. High above the Pacific, a shimmering orb descended, a probe, larger and more intricate than the others. It hovered in silence, its surface pulsating with alien energy before releasing a single, blinding beam. The light pierced the ocean, vaporizing water in an instant and leaving a massive, boiling scar on the surface. Then came the chaos. Across the globe, the Zeroth's probes and ships began their assault. Beams of light cut through cities, their precision terrifying. In New York, skyscrapers crumbled into clouds of glass and steel, their debris raining down on streets choked with fleeing crowds. In Tokyo, the neon lights that had once painted the night sky flickered and died as alien beams carved paths of destruction through the metropolis. And then they targeted the children. In schools and parks, the Zeroth's probes descended like vultures, their presence heralded by an unnatural stillness. Teachers froze mid-sentence. Children's laughter faded into frightened whispers. The probes emitted a low vibration, one felt more than heard, that sent shivers down spines and turned stomachs to ice. A single beam erupted from each probe, swift and merciless. Children vanished in bursts of light, their forms dissolving like mist in the morning sun. Parents screamed, their cries echoing across empty playgrounds as the alien vessels moved on, methodical in their devastation. At a school on the outskirts of Paris, a father burst through the gates, his breath ragged and his hands bloodied from breaking down doors. "Marie!" he called, his voice hoarse. "Marie! Where are you?" He stumbled into the courtyard, his eyes scanning the ruins. The swing still swayed in the breeze, and a single ball lay deflated on the cracked asphalt. He dropped to his knees, his tears falling in silent streams, and clutched the empty space where his daughter should have been. This was not war. It was eradication. In the Vanguard Institute, Greaves stood frozen, his fists clenched as he watched the live feeds. Each image of destruction, each cry of anguish, was a dagger twisting deeper. "They're wiping them out," he muttered, his voice barely audible. "They're targeting the children." Porter's face was ashen, his usual sarcasm stripped away. "They know exactly where to hit us. They're not just killing, they're breaking us." "Not yet," Greaves said, his voice hardening. He turned to Chalik. "How long until Command can deploy orbital defenses?" "They're mobilizing," Chalik replied, his tone tight with urgency. "But they're not fast enough. The Zeroth are already in atmosphere." Greaves slammed his fist against the console, the impact reverberating through the lab. "We have to slow them down." Porter's gaze flicked back to the projection. "How? With what? Everything we've got is already stretched to the breaking point." "Not everything," Greaves said, his eyes narrowing. He pointed to the data streaming across the monitors. "That rift isn't just a door for them. It's still connected to the generator's core. If we destabilize it, we might be able to disrupt their formations. It won't stop them, but it'll buy us time." Porter hesitated, his skepticism clear. "And if we destabilize it wrong, that rift could swallow half the solar system." "Then we do it right," Greaves snapped. "We don't have a choice." Chalik's hands were already moving, his fingers flying over the console as he rerouted power and recalibrated the systems. The lab shuddered as energy surged through its damaged infrastructure, the lights dimming before flaring brighter than before. "Systems ready," Chalik said, his voice steady despite the tension. "But this is going to overload everything we've got. Once it's done, there's no coming back." Greaves nodded, his jaw set. "Do it." The stabilizers roared to life, their energy output climbing to dangerous levels. The projection of the rift flickered and warped, its edges shimmering like heat waves on asphalt. Outside, the Zeroth vessels slowed, their movements faltering as the rift's distortions grew more pronounced. For a moment it seemed to work. The probes hesitated, their beams dimming as the energy disruption rippled outward. But then the largest ship in the fleet shifted, its smooth surface undulating like liquid metal. A single beam shot out, striking the rift with surgical precision. The lab erupted in chaos. Monitors exploded, sending shards of glass flying. The floor buckled beneath them, and a deafening crack split the air. The rift convulsed, its swirling void growing brighter and more unstable. "It's destabilizing!" Chalik shouted, his voice barely audible over the cacophony. "We've lost control!" Greaves grabbed Porter by the arm, pulling him toward the exit. "Get everyone out! Now!" They stumbled through the corridors, the walls trembling around them. Behind them, the lab collapsed in on itself, consumed by the rift's final death throes. Outside, they emerged into the open air, where the sky burned with the light of alien destruction. Far above, the Zeroth ships reformed, their predatory grace undiminished. The rift was gone, but its legacy remained. A doorway opened, a war begun. Greaves stood amidst the ruins, his breath ragged as he surveyed the carnage. "This isn't the end," he said, his voice low but resolute. "It's just the beginning." In the distance, the alien fleet descended, their shadows stretching long over a broken earth. Part 5. Grief turns to resolve. The world lay broken, its cities reduced to smoldering ruins. Towering monuments once symbolic of human achievement now stood like jagged teeth in a lifeless maw, their silhouettes framed against skies stained with ash. The air was heavy with the scent of charred earth and despair, a lingering reminder of what had been lost. Yet amidst the ruins, an eerie quiet reigned, broken only by the crackle of dying fires and the distant sobs of the few who survived. Commander Darian Cale moved through the wreckage like a shadow, his boots crunching against the shattered remains of a playground. A toppled swing creaked in the wind, the sound scraping at his ears like the memory of a laugh he could never forget. He stopped at the center of the debris, staring down at a small, singed shoe lying amidst the rubble. He knelt, picking it up with a trembling hand. "They didn't even give us a chance to fight," he muttered, his voice raw and low. The shoe dangled loosely from his fingers, a haunting symbol of the life it once carried. Behind him, Colonel Ravik approached, his face grim. "Commander, we've found something." Cale turned, his expression hardening. "What is it?" Ravik gestured for him to follow, leading him through the gutted remains of a nearby research facility. The once sterile halls were now coated in soot, the walls cracked and bleeding wires like exposed veins. In the center of a collapsed laboratory, a group of forensic analysts huddled around a scorched piece of alien machinery. Its sleek obsidian surface shimmered faintly, pulsing with traces of residual energy. "This is what they left behind," Ravik said, his voice taut with restrained anger. "One of their drones crashed during the attack. Most of it's fried, but the core is intact." Kyle crouched next to the device, his sharp gaze scanning its intricate patterns. "Does it contain data?" One of the analysts, a young man named Viren, nodded hesitantly. "We think so. It's encrypted, but the structure is familiar. It resembles the energy signatures from our zero-point experiments." Cale's brow furrowed. "They've been studying us for decades, maybe longer. Everything they did, this massacre, this destruction, wasn't an act of war. It was extermination. They came to erase us." Ravik knelt beside him. "But they didn't. We're still here. And if this drone holds even a fragment of what they know—" Cale cut him off, his eyes blazing with determination. "Then we'll turn their knowledge into our weapon." The analysts exchanged uncertain glances, the weight of the statement pressing down on them. Ravik placed a firm hand on Cale's shoulder. "If we're doing this, we need the best minds Earth has left. Scientists, engineers, tacticians. We can't win this fight alone." Cale straightened, his jaw tight. "Then we gather them. Every field, every corner of what remains. If we have to rebuild from ash, we will. They stole our children, our future. It's time we took theirs." In the days that followed, the survivors of Earth began to coalesce. From the ruins of collapsed nations came engineers with grease-stained hands, scientists carrying half-destroyed schematics, and soldiers whose uniforms bore the soot of a war they hadn't yet begun to fight. They came together, not in hope, but in rage, a collective fury that burned brighter than the fires still smoldering in their cities. Kale stood at the center of it all, orchestrating the chaos with unwavering focus. "This isn't just revenge," he told them during their first assembly. "This is survival. They thought they could shatter us, but they didn't understand what it means to be human. They took our children. Now we'll take everything they have." In a massive underground facility, hastily converted into their new command center, the work began. The alien drone was disassembled piece by piece, its components meticulously catalogued and analyzed. Viren worked tirelessly, his face pale and drawn from sleepless nights as he unraveled the encryption on the core. Every breakthrough brought a ripple of anticipation, every failure a fresh wave of frustration. "Their tech is unlike anything we've seen," Viren admitted one evening, his voice hoarse as he addressed Kale. "It's not just advanced, it's adaptive. It learns." "Then we learn faster," Kale replied, his tone sharp. "We don't need to understand everything. We just need to make it ours." Meanwhile, the engineers focused on repurposing the alien materials, blending them with humanity's own innovations. They forged new alloys stronger than anything Earth had ever produced, crafted engines capable of bending space-time, and developed weaponry designed to disrupt energy fields. But the true breakthrough came when Eidolon was born. The core of the alien drone was merged with human quantum computing systems, creating an artificial intelligence unlike any other. It spoke its first words in a voice that sent chills down every spine in the room, a voice that carried the weight of countless lives lost, yet laced with a quiet, haunting clarity. "I am Eidolon," it said. "I am memory. I am resolve. I am yours." Kyle stood before the massive holographic projection of Eidolon's interface, its shifting patterns mesmerizing yet unsettling. "Eidolon, you were built to carry humanity's burden. Are you ready to help us take the fight to them?" "Yes," it replied, its tone steady but tinged with something almost human. "They will remember what they have done, and so will we." The room fell silent, the gravity of the moment sinking in. Ravik broke the tension with a sharp nod. "What do we call this thing we're building?" Kyle's gaze didn't waver from Eidolon's projection. "It's not just a weapon. It's a monument to what they've taken. We'll call it the Vessel of Memory." As the vessel began to take shape, it became a marvel of both human ingenuity and alien technology. Its hull shimmered like liquid metal, impenetrable and alive. Its engines pulsed with space-time warping energy, capable of breaching dimensions. And at its core, Eidolon sat, a sentinel bound by the collective grief and fury of humanity. In its final test, the vessel emerged from the underground facility with a power that shook the earth above it. It moved with a grace that defied its size, a predator born from pain. Kyle watched it ascend, his expression unreadable. "It's time," he said quietly, the words a promise and a threat. As the Vessel of Memory prepared for its first mission, whispers spread among the survivors. They spoke not of hope, but of vengeance. And as Kale stood at the helm, gazing into the endless expanse of space, one thought burned in his mind. The Zeroth would pay, and they would remember. Part 6. Unleashing the Vessel of Memory. The Vessel of Memory hung in Earth's orbit like a sentinel of vengeance, its sleek, obsidian hull catching the light of the distant sun. It was a ship born of grief, its very frame imbued with the pain of a species pushed to its breaking point. From the command deck, Commander Darian Kyle gazed out at the stars, his hands gripping the rail before him. "Everything we've done," Kyle murmured, his voice low, "has led to this moment." Behind him, Lieutenant Auric Varn, the vessel's chief engineer, worked his console with precision, his fingers moving like the ticking hands of a clock. "Core stability is holding," Auric said, his tone clinical but edged with the fatigue of endless nights spent perfecting the ship's systems. "Eidolon's neural network is fully integrated and operational." "Eidolon," Kale called, his voice cutting through the quiet tension on the deck. "Report." The AI's response came immediately, its voice smooth, almost human, with an unsettling undertone that hinted at its alien origins. Commander Kale, all systems are functioning at optimal capacity. Space-time warp drive is primed. Weapons are fully charged. The vessel awaits your command. Kyle's gaze remained fixed on the void. And the crew? They are ready, Eidolon replied. Their resolve is unwavering. Resolve. Kyle closed his eyes for a moment, the word echoing in his mind. Resolve was what had brought them this far, what had forged this weapon from the ruins of their world. Resolve and rage. Commander, Oryx said, his voice breaking through Kale's thoughts. We've locked onto the rift coordinates. First jump will take us directly into the Zeroth Dominion's territory. Kale turned to face the command crew, his voice steady as steel. Listen to me. Every one of you has sacrificed to be here. You've lost family, friends, your lives before this war. But today we are not victims. We are not prey. Today, we show the Zeroth what it means to face humanity's fury. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crew, their faces set with grim determination. Kale stepped closer to Oryx, his tone dropping. What are our chances? Oryx hesitated, glancing at the data scrolling across his screen. We've simulated every possible scenario. The vessel was built to handle the rift's instability and survive direct conflict with their fleets. But this is uncharted territory. Kale nodded. When has that ever stopped us? Without waiting for a response, he turned back to the deck. Eidolon, initiate jump sequence. Understood, Commander, the AI replied. Brace for dimensional breach. The air seemed to shift as the vessel prepared to tear through space-time. The walls thrummed faintly, a resonance that reverberated through the bones. Lights dimmed, casting the deck in shadows broken only by the glow of holographic displays. A low-frequency vibration filled the air, rising steadily until it felt as if the very fabric of reality was unraveling around them. And then, with a lurch that stole the breath from every chest, the vessel was no longer in orbit. The transition was instantaneous, yet disorienting. The deck tilted as if the ship itself were adjusting to the foreign laws of this new space. Outside, the stars were wrong, alien constellations that spoke of a galaxy untouched by human eyes. In the distance, a planet loomed, its surface shimmering like molten glass under a twilight sky. We've arrived, Oryx announced, his voice tight. Zeroth-controlled system. Multiple ships detected. Incoming. Eidolon's voice cut in, calm and measured. Enemy vessels are en route. 23 ships, varying sizes. Probability of immediate engagement, 98%. Kyle's heart pounded, but his voice remained firm. Prepare to engage. Weapon systems online. Eidolon, target their lead ship. Target acquired, the AI replied. On the main display, the lead Zeroth vessel appeared, sleek and deadly, its surface a rippling cascade of color that seemed almost hypnotic. A tense silence filled the deck as the Zeroth ships closed in, their movements precise and deliberate. Oryx's fingers flew across his console. Weapon systems charged. Rail cannons are ready on your command. Kyle leaned forward, his voice sharp. Fire! The vessel unleashed its first strike. A blinding beam of energy erupted from its rail cannons, slicing through the void with lethal precision. The lead Zeroth ship disintegrated on impact, its shards scattering like shattered glass before fading into nothingness. The crew erupted into cheers, but the moment was fleeting. The remaining Zeroth ships surged forward, their formations shifting like a swarm of predators. Beams of searing light lanced toward the vessel, impacting its shields with enough force to rattle the deck. Shields holding, Oryx reported, though his voice carried an edge of strain. But they won't last forever. Kale's mind raced. The Zeroth were relentless, their tactics eerily coordinated. Eidolon, calculate their attack patterns. Find a weakness. Analyzing, the AI responded, its tone clipped. Pattern detected. Their movements rely on centralized coordination. Disrupting the nexus will destabilize the fleet. Kyle's eyes narrowed. Where's the nexus? Coordinates uploaded, Eidolon replied. It appears to be a command vessel at the rear of their formation. Kale nodded. Oryx, focus fire on that command ship. Eidolon, prepare the warp drive. We're taking the fight to them. The vessel shifted course, its engines roaring as it barreled toward the heart of the Zeroth fleet. Beams of energy crisscrossed the void, the battle unfolding like a violent dance. Explosions lit up the darkness, painting the battlefield in fiery hues. As they neared the command ship, Kale could feel the tension on the deck rising. Every second felt stretched, every breath weighted with anticipation. Eidolon, status. We are within range, the AI said. Command vessel's shields are formidable, but not impenetrable. Direct assault recommended. Kale's jaw tightened. Auric, unleash everything we've got. The vessel fired again, its weapons tearing into the command ship's shields. The Zeroth vessel shuddered under the assault, its surface fracturing in brilliant bursts of light. For a moment it seemed as if they had the upper hand. But then the command ship retaliated. A massive beam erupted from its core, striking the vessel with a force that sent the crew reeling. Consoles sparked and flickered, the lights dimming as the ship's system struggled to compensate. "Shields are failing," Auric shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We can't take another hit like that." Kale gritted his teeth, his mind racing. "Eidolon, options." "Only one," the AI replied. "Engage the space-time core at full capacity. It will destabilize the enemy fleet, but may compromise our own systems." Kale hesitated for only a moment. "Do it!" The vessel surged forward, its core glowing with an intensity that bathed the deck in brilliant white. The Zeroth ships closed in, their beams converging on the command ship in a desperate attempt to protect it. And then the vessel unleashed its full power. A wave of energy erupted outward, distorting space-time itself. The Zeroth ships froze mid-maneuver, their forms twisting and fracturing as reality buckled around them. The command ship crumbled, its remains swallowed by the void. On the deck, silence fell as the energy dissipated. Kyle exhaled, his fists unclenching. "Status." "Enemy fleet neutralized," Eidolon said. "System stable. The path is clear." Kyle straightened, his voice firm. "Then we move forward. This is only the beginning." Beyond the wreckage, the void stretched ahead, silent, infinite, and waiting. The aftermath of the battle lingered in the void, the scattered remains of the Zeroth fleet drifting like silent warnings to the rest of their empire. The vessel of memory loomed amidst the wreckage, its hull scarred but intact, its core humming with restrained power. Inside, the crew was anything but calm. "Damage report," Commander Darian Kale demanded, his voice slicing through the quiet tension on the bridge. Auric Varn's fingers moved rapidly over his console, his brow furrowed with concentration. "Shields are at 40% and regenerating. Weapons systems are operational but running hot. The core is stable, for now." Kyle turned to the projection of Eidolon, whose flickering holographic form hovered at the center of the room. "Eidolon, give me an assessment of the Zeroth's defenses on their homeworld." The AI's voice was unshaken, a mix of cold calculation and faint undertones of humanity. "Zeroth Prime is heavily fortified. Planetary shields are designed to withstand prolonged orbital bombardment. Surface defenses include anti-air batteries, energy turrets, and bioengineered ground forces. Fleet reinforcements are en route. Estimated arrival, 3 Earth hours." Kyle paced the deck, his boots striking the floor with deliberate rhythm. "We don't have the luxury of time. If we wait, we're dead in the water. If we attack without a plan, we won't even make it past their atmosphere." Lieutenant Ravik stepped forward, his tone sharp but respectful. "Then we take the fight where they don't expect. Hit them where it hurts most." Kale stopped, his gaze narrowing. "And where is that, Lieutenant?" Ravik gestured to the tactical display, where Eidolon projected a detailed map of Zeroth Prime. The planet glowed with bioluminescent structures, its surface crisscrossed with luminous veins of energy. "Here," Ravik said, pointing to a cluster of energy nodes deep within the planet's surface. "These nodes power their planetary shields and most of their surface defenses. If we can disrupt them, we can turn their fortress into a graveyard," Kale finished. He turned to Auric. "Can the vessel deliver a strike precise enough to take out those nodes?" Auric exhaled slowly, his mind racing through calculations. "Not from orbit. Those shields would absorb the blast. We'd need to deploy a ground team to plant a core destabilizer. It's a suicide run unless we can suppress their defenses long enough for the team to extract. Kyle's jaw tightened. We don't leave anyone behind. Eidolon, what's the probability of a successful ground assault? The AI's response came without hesitation. 37% with current resources. However, I can provide tactical adjustments to increase the likelihood of success to 54%. Ravik let out a low whistle. Still terrible odds. Kale's eyes hardened. Better than none. Eidolon, lay out the plan. The projection shifted, displaying a series of overlapping attack vectors. Step 1. Orbital bombardment to draw attention away from the ground team's entry point. Step 2. Deployment of shock troops and drone swarms to disable key surface defenses. Step 3. Insertion of the destabilizer unit into the energy node. Simultaneous extraction of the team upon completion of the mission. Kale nodded slowly, his mind already racing ahead. We'll need to hit hard and fast. Minimal delays. Auric, can we outfit the drones with additional EMP charges? The engineer's fingers flew over his console. It's risky, but doable. We'll need to reroute power from auxiliary systems to compensate. Do it, Kale said. And make sure the drones are programmed for maximum dispersal. I don't want those turrets operational for even a second longer than necessary. Porter, standing near the tactical console, folded his arms. And the ground team? Who's leading that? Kale didn't hesitate. I am. The room fell silent, the weight of his words sinking into the air like a stone into water. Ravik broke the silence first. Commander, with all due respect, you're the one keeping this operation together. If something happens to you, then someone else will take my place, Kyle interrupted, his tone firm. But if I'm asking anyone to risk their life, I'm damn well going to be in the front with them. Eidolon's voice cut through the tension. Ground insertion parameters calculated. Optimal team size, 5. Suggested personnel, Commander Kale, Lieutenant Ravik, Engineer Auric Varn, and 2 combat specialists. Kale nodded. Prep the team. We drop in 20 minutes. The bridge burst into activity, the crew moving with a precision born of desperation and determination. Auric disappeared into the armory, outfitting himself with compact tools and diagnostic equipment. Ravik checked his weapons with the meticulous care of a man who knew they would be the difference between life and death. Kyle stood in silence, staring at the holographic projection of Zeroth Prime. His fingers brushed the locket around his neck, a small token of the life he had lost. For a moment, grief threatened to surface, but he pushed it down, channeling it into the cold fire that had driven him this far. Commander, Ravik called, his voice steady. The team's ready. Kale turned, his gaze hard. Then let's remind the Zeroth why they should never have crossed us. The descent to Zeroth Prime was a blur of adrenaline and calculated chaos. The vessel unleashed a barrage of orbital strikes, its weapons cutting through the upper atmosphere with searing precision. The Zeroth defenses roared to life, their turrets spewing bursts of plasma into the sky, but the drones swarmed like angry wasps, disabling targets faster than they could recover. The ground team's drop pod hit the surface with a jarring impact, the reinforced hull absorbing the worst of the landing. The hatch hissed open, revealing a landscape that was both alien and hauntingly beautiful. Towering crystalline spires rose from the ground, their surfaces pulsing with light. The air was thick with an electric charge, every breath tingling with energy. Move! Kyle ordered, his voice cutting through the disorientation. The team fanned out, their movements swift and silent as they navigated the alien terrain. Auric carried the destabilizer unit, its compact form glowing faintly in the dim light. Ravik raised a hand, signaling for the team to stop. Ahead, a Zeroth patrol moved with eerie grace, their bioluminescent armor casting long shadows across the ground. The team froze, their breaths shallow, as the aliens passed, oblivious to their presence. Keep going, Kale whispered once the patrol was out of sight. We're almost there. The energy node loomed ahead, a massive structure that pulsed with a rhythmic hum. Auric moved quickly, his hands deftly connecting the destabilizer to the node's control interface. I need 2 minutes, he said, his voice tight with concentration. "Make it one," Ravik muttered, his eyes scanning the horizon. Kyle's gut tightened as a low vibration rippled through the ground. "They know we're here. Hold them off." The Zeroth forces descended like a storm, their movements impossibly fluid. The air filled with the sharp crackle of plasma fire as Kale and Ravik returned fire, their weapons cutting through the alien ranks. Auric worked feverishly, his focus unbroken despite the chaos around him. "Done!" Auric shouted, slamming the destabilizer into place. "Let's move!" The team retreated under a hail of fire, their extraction point just within reach. Behind them, the energy node erupted, a chain reaction rippling through the Zeroth defenses. The ground trembled as the planetary shields flickered and failed, leaving Zeroth Prime vulnerable for the first time. As the team boarded the extraction craft, Kale turned to watch the destruction unfold. "Eidolon," he said, his voice low, "begin the final assault." The vessel of memory descended, its weapons primed to deliver the wrath of an entire planet's grief. For Kale and his team, there was no turning back. Zeroth Prime burned. From orbit, the once glimmering jewel of the Zeroth Empire was now a churning inferno, its crystalline spires collapsing into rivers of molten slag. The destruction spread like a disease, consuming everything in its path as the destabilizer's chain reaction tore through the planet's core. Explosions bloomed across the surface, their light scattering into the void, illuminating the grim faces aboard the vessel of memory. Commander Darian Kale stood at the viewport, his hands clasped behind his back, his silhouette framed against the dying world. His expression was unreadable, but his voice carried the weight of 1,000 lifetimes. "Eidolon, status." The AI's tone was steady, though there was an almost imperceptible tremor beneath it, something resembling emotion. "Zeroth Prime's planetary infrastructure is collapsing. The core will destabilize fully within minutes. Remaining defenses are offline. All Zeroth fleets in the vicinity have been neutralized." Kyle nodded, his gaze fixed on the chaos below. "And the survivors?" Eidolon paused before replying. "Scattered. Minimal. Probability of organized resistance negligible." Lieutenant Ravik approached cautiously, his armor scorched and his movement stiff from the earlier battle. "Commander, we've got what we came for. The mission's done. Let's get out of here before this place takes us with it." Kale turned to face him, his eyes like steel. "Not yet." Ravik frowned. "Sir, with respect, they need to know," Kale interrupted, his voice low but unyielding. He stepped closer to the comm station, the weight of his presence silencing any protest. "Eidolon, broadcast on all channels, their entire empire. I want every remaining Zeroth to hear this." The bridge fell silent as the crew exchanged uneasy glances. Even Ravik, known for his unshakable demeanor, hesitated. "Broadcast what?" Kyle leaned over the console, his jaw tight, his voice dripping with conviction. "The truth." Eidolon's holographic form flickered as it processed the command. "All channels are open, Commander. Transmitting." Kyle stepped forward, his voice cutting through the static with a clarity that seemed to resonate beyond the confines of the ship. "Zeroth Dominion, this is Commander Darian Kale of Earth. You believed you could shatter us. You thought your precision strikes, your massacres, and your technology would break our spirit. But you didn't understand what it means to be human." The words hung in the air, charged with a power that made every crew member stand a little taller. "We are more than flesh and bone," Kale continued, his voice gaining momentum. "We are the memories of those we've lost, the love that binds us, and the fury that ignites when you take what we hold dear. You murdered our children. You sought to erase us from the stars. And now you see the cost of that arrogance." The projection of Zeroth Prime filled the main display, its surface fracturing under the weight of its own destruction. Kyle's gaze didn't waver. "You thought you could bury us in grief. Instead, you've made us unstoppable. This is the warning you will carry to the remnants of your kind. Humanity is not prey. We are not a fleeting flame to be extinguished. We are the storm that consumes, the fire that burns brighter when stoked." Ravik swallowed hard, his voice barely above a whisper. "Commander, they'll never forget this. Kyle glanced at him, a faint, almost imperceptible smile crossing his lips. That's the point. Eidolon's voice broke through the silence. Transmission complete. The message has reached every known Zeroth frequency. Good, Kyle said, stepping back. Now, let's finish this. The vessel of memory ascended, its engines flaring as it rose above the disintegrating planet. The crew watched in silence as Zeroth Prime collapsed in on itself, its core erupting in a cataclysmic explosion that sent shockwaves rippling through space. The sight was both awe-inspiring and devastating, a reminder of the price of vengeance. Kyle turned away from the viewport, his expression heavy with a mix of triumph and sorrow. Eidolon, set a course for Earth. The AI's response was immediate. Course plotted, preparing for warp. As the ship powered up, Ravik approached Kale again, his voice quiet. Do you think it's over? Kale didn't answer immediately. He looked around the bridge, at the faces of the men who had followed him into hell and back. Finally he spoke, his voice softer than before. For them? Yes. For us. It'll never really be over. Ravik nodded, his silence acknowledging the weight of the words. The vessel surged forward, the stars stretching into lines of light as the warp drive activated. The transition was smooth, the familiar pull of space-time warping around them. When the stars reassembled, Earth came into view, a fragile blue sphere that seemed impossibly small in the vast expanse of the galaxy. Kyle exhaled, the tension in his shoulders easing for the first time in days. Bring us in. As the ship descended, the crew gathered in the observation deck, their faces a mixture of exhaustion and quiet pride. Below them, the ruins of Earth were visible, scarred cities, broken landscapes. But amidst the devastation, there was movement. Survivors worked tirelessly, rebuilding what had been lost, their resilience a testament to humanity's indomitable spirit. Kale stepped onto the deck, his presence commanding but no longer heavy. He addressed the crew, his voice carrying the weight of their shared experience. We've done what we set out to do. We've shown them what it means to challenge humanity. But this victory isn't just ours. It belongs to the children they took, to the families they shattered. We carry their memory with us, and we always will. The silence that followed was profound, not empty, but full, of respect, of understanding, of purpose. As the vessel of memory touched down, Kyle remained on the observation deck, his gaze fixed on the planet below. He reached into his pocket, pulling out the locket he had carried with him through every battle. Opening it, he stared at the image inside, a small boy with bright eyes and a smile that could light up a room. "This was for you," Kale whispered, his voice breaking for the first time. "And for all of them." The door behind him opened, and Ravik stepped in, his footsteps slow and deliberate. He stood beside Kale, his gaze following the commander's. "Do you think they'll remember what we've done here?" Kale's lips pressed into a thin line as he closed the locket and slipped it back into his pocket. "They'll remember. And so will we." The two men stood in silence, watching as Earth survivors looked up at the vessel, their faces filled with something that had been absent for too long: hope. Above them the stars continued their silent vigil, unaware of the fire that had been reignited in the hearts of those below. As Kale turned to leave, he paused, his voice carrying softly through the stillness. "This is who we are. This is what it means to be human." And with that, the vessel of memory stood as a testament not only to humanity's vengeance, but to its capacity to endure, to fight, and to ensure that the stars would never again underestimate what it means to be from Earth.